What is happening, everybody? It is Thursday afternoon, which means it is time for me to break down the upcoming NFL slate and looking at it from a Rainmaker's perspective. If you guys have any questions for me at all, and it could be pertaining to anything, whether it's Thursday night football, any of the other primetime games, Rainmakers in general, throw them to the YouTube chat. I could definitely answer any and all of those questions over the course of the show, and then even other stuff. You just want to know who to sit or start from a fantasy football team, anything that you guys want to ask me in the YouTube comment, certainly acceptable. All is fair game in there. So if you guys could do me one favor, though, as you come in, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, helps us out a whole bunch, helps us keep the content around here free. And then also, if you guys haven't checked out Rainmakers yet for NFL, and I know almost all of you have at this point, but if you haven't, check out the NFL Reignmakers free starters pack, because you are going to get an entire set of cards that you could use to build a lineup this week, and you win actual cash prizes with it. And it's totally free. So there's a link for that below to claim your starters pack. And already see some people that are in the YouTube chat right here. And whatever you guys want me to talk about, by the way, you could just throw it in. Whether you want me to talk about the main slate, Thursday night football, throw that in and we could definitely, show's for you. So whatever it is you guys want to talk about. And I already see some people in the chat right now. So a shout out, Grandpa Steve. Steve, you actual grandpa or just the YouTube handle? We got iCampsy in the chat saying, yo, yo, yo. And then a Vic David Figueroa saying, what's up, Greg? What is up, Vic David Figueroa? So let's go and answer some of the questions, because I do see right away that we do have one from Grandpa Steve in the YouTube chat. He says, why are some cards unavailable like Nakua and Kamara? So these are two guys that I do expect to be added in the near future. I know that there's additional packs that come out with some of the cards that were not there for the start of the year. So here's actual grandpa. So Grandpa Steve is an actual grandpa. Well, you don't seem that old to me, Steve. What can I tell from an avatar on YouTube? But you look younger than what your age is then. But Steve is asking why the Nakua and Kamara cards are unavailable. So different reasons. The Nakua one is because he was a later draft pick that just nobody expected to be massively relevant over the course of the season. The way that the rookie cards worked this year was that there was draft packs, and depending where guys got picked in the draft, that's who those players turned into. So because Nakua wasn't one of the top, I'm trying to remember how far it went. It was maybe like the top 8 wide receivers in the draft got added as cards. And because he wasn't one of those top players, we just didn't get a card for Nakua to open up the year. And then as for Kamara, it's because he was not active at the start of the year. So Kamara was suspended. So think of it from this standpoint, is if you had bought a pack and your big pull in the pack was a Kamara as like an elite or a legendary or something like that, it would have been a bummer if you didn't have access to Kamara for the first few slates of the year. So I expect Kamara is going to be added fairly shortly in one of the upcoming additional packs, but it's just because of his suspension at the start of the year that he wasn't available. And then Nakua just because he was drafted late. Now, in hindsight, Nakua might be the first wide receiver picked in this draft if they redid the draft again, but not the case. But I do expect both Kamara and Nakua to be in the card sets in short order. Thank you for the question, Steve. I do appreciate it. Let's go ahead and start looking at the main slate for Sunday. And one thing that I like to do here, if you guys haven't watched this show yet, is I start by looking at the top stacks that we have here over at Stokastic.com, which, what does this information tell us? It tells us each team's odds of being the top scoring team for DraftKings fantasy purposes. So not necessarily the highest scoring team on the slate, but for DraftKings, which team are we expecting to score the most fantasy points? And there's a couple of metrics in here that I like to look at. Top stack odds, that is just flat out odds of them being the highest scoring stack. And then in addition to that, rush percentage. Like how often is the team going to be running the football in our projections versus how often are they going to be passing the football? With that in mind, we have, 4 teams that have double-digit odds being one of the top scoring teams on the slate. Much flatter this week than what we've seen in some other previous weeks, where there's been a lot of times where it's like one team is a 20% chance, another team is an 18% chance, and then there'll be a bunch of teams that are sub 10% chance. It's a lot flatter this week. We've got the Bills at 12.9% leading the way, followed by the Rams at 12.5%. The Rams, if I remember correctly, were our number 1 top stack odds team a week ago, followed by the Chargers at 11.3%, the Chiefs at 11%, and then we start to go into the single-digit range. Bucks at 9.3%. We've got the Raiders at 7.8%, so a little bit of a drop-off once we get past the Buccaneers. So let's start to look at some of these individual teams, starting with the Bills, with the one caveat being that I don't usually love using my superstar spot on a quarterback. But let's still go ahead and look at what stands out for the Bills using some of the other tools and projections we have at Stokastic.com. And this is totally free, what I'm about to pull up here. So if you guys ever want to just check this out for your own personal use, I'll show you how to access it. If you're on our homepage, go to the NFL DFS premium data, go to projections, and then DraftKings Reignmakers NFL projections. Even though it says it's listed under premium there, it is a free page on the site. Now, what you're going to find here is our fantasy projections on DraftKings for all of the individual players, as well as what their floor prices are. So it helps to identify what some of the best overall values are on the slate. So here we go. Tool just loaded up. Let's start with the Bills. All right, Buffalo. And after we look through some of these top stacks, if there's time and you guys don't have any other questions, then I'll do a look at Thursday Night Football. But if we go ahead and look at the Bills, who's projected to score the most fantasy points? Shocking. Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs. Now, one thing that really does stand out here, or a couple things that stand out. Number one is that Josh Allen, I don't really think, despite our top stack odds, is the best play because he has a 19.37 fantasy point projection, which is pretty modest for quarterbacks. Part of that is because the Patriots on the other side of the game, they just play at a slow pace. So that could limit the amount of plays Josh Allen's actually out on the field. But then the other part too, Josh Allen using the superstar status relative to the 19.37 projection, it's just not something I want to burn my superstar card on, right? Like I'd rather use a running back or a wide receiver in the superstar spot. And then as for Stephon Diggs, great projection, 20.95 fantasy points. If you guys have a Stephon Diggs, go ahead and play him. He's one of the best wide receivers we could play on this entire slate, but a $19.50 core floor price is very, very high for Stephon Diggs. If we go ahead and look at all of the skill position players, let's see, who has the highest? If we just sort by core, who is the highest? It's Stephon Diggs and Keenan Allen are the two players with the highest floor core prices. So with that in mind, a little bit more than I'd want to pay for Stephon Diggs if you guys are just looking for a card on the secondary market to fill your lineup out with. A little bit too expensive for my liking. So not a ton that I like from the Bills from that standpoint, but I'll sort back by them and see if there's any value that maybe sticks out. Like if you guys are playing the deep slate contest, maybe there's somebody from the Bills in that sense that could stand out. All right, projection. So we got Diggs at just over 20 fantasy points. Josh Allen, 19.37. And we got James Cook here at 12.74. Honestly, James Cook isn't a terrible value. Only $4.90 as the floor price here. 12.74. Yeah, so I think that he's a viable running back for this slate. And this is also a slate that in general is going to be a little bit lower scoring. Like we just sort by running backs here and then turn off the Bills filter. Yeah, look at the steep drop-off. So you got McCaffrey, who, by the way, I'm actually going to take him out of here because he's not on the main slate. So if we just look at main slate running backs, there's Kenneth Walker, projected for 18.65 fantasy points, the highest of any running back for us on the entire slate, followed by Josh Jacobs, Austin Eckler, who does have the superstar status, Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley, who also has the superstar status. So, I mean, overall, if you look at these running backs, the difference in price between James Cook, who's projected for 12.74 fantasy points, and then somebody like Bijan Robinson, who I expect to be, fairly popular, 14.7 fantasy point projection. It's only 2 less fantasy points of a projection for James Cook, but if you're looking to buy him on the secondary market, he only costs a third of the price. It does make him a little bit better of a buy from that standpoint. But still, nothing that really stands out too much. Cook would be more of a deep contest play, not somebody be looking to play in like the main slate on Sunday. Let's look at the Rams. Who's standing out about the Rams here? And then one thing to mention when it comes to the Rams, which is related to the question from Grandpa Steve, is that there are no Nakua cards, which does slightly limit the options that we're going to be able to get to here from the Rams. But let's see what we have here. All right, Rams. Whoops. Where are they? Here we go. Los Angeles Rams, and then turn off the running back filter. All right, so who's projecting best from the Rams for us this weekend? Cooper Kupp. I really like Cooper Kupp as a superstar play. And if you guys have been watching the show week over week, it was something that we were on a couple of weeks ago, is buy Cooper Kupp when he first comes back from injury for a couple of reasons. Number one, his price was at a floor. At the time, Cooper Kupp was like $8 on the secondary market. That was as cheap as he was going to be for a little bit of time. And then also, he's just a stud wide receiver, Cooper Kupp. So if you bought Cooper Kupp a couple of weeks ago, you've already gotten a couple of good fantasy games out of him, and his core floor price has gone up by, about 50% here. So you could have played Cooper Kupp, made some money with his cards because he's played really well, and then you could have sold him for another slight profit on top of that. So Cooper Kupp, still a superstar that I think makes sense to play. And then in addition to that, makes for a really good stack with Matthew Stafford, who's one of our highest projected quarterbacks. In addition to that, super low floor asking price, only $7.65 for Matt Stafford. So you could get this Stafford to Kupp combination for, I was going to say right about $20, but I realized actually exactly $20 right now. $7.65 for Stafford, $12.30. Oh, actually cheaper. You could get a Kupp here for, let me sort this way. There we go. All right, so you could get Stafford for as low as $6.50, and then a Cooper Kupp for as low as $11.89. So altogether, like $18 for the Stafford Kupp combination, which I do expect to be a really strong one throughout the rest of the season. So something that I think we should be looking at to target on the secondary market. As far as the running backs go on the Rams, it's really hard to know what to make of this scenario from a Reignmakers perspective, because even though Kyren Williams is out, Darrell Henderson is just been signed by the Rams. And he is somebody who I do expect is going to play a pretty decent role in the backfield when you consider that he's familiar with the Rams system. He's been a workhorse for them in the backfield under Sean McVay in the past. But since he was just signed a couple of days ago, there are no cards of him. It really murkies the waters of the running back situation for the Rams, which makes it kind of unplayable from a Reignmakers perspective. The Chargers taking on the Kansas City Chiefs. And then a game that would make sense is a game stack here, because we have these teams with the third and fourth best odds of being the top stack. But I don't really want to look at Justin Herbert or Pat Mahomes, both superstar quarterbacks. Let's look at the skill position players from those teams and see what we could do as far as a skill position stack. So if we go Chargers, Chiefs, here we go, Chiefs. All right, and now we'll go by wide receiver, tight end, running back. And it's funny, right? Because tight ends is something that for main slate contests, we don't really have to consider all that much on Reignmakers, because we're not forced to play a tight end. And in general, the tight end position kind of sucks for fantasy related to the running backs, the wide receivers, and the positions that we have at our disposal over on Reignmakers. The tight end spot is wide receiver / tight end. And then there's a utility spot, which could be a wide receiver, a tight end, or a running back. So we're not forced to play a tight end. But if we are making a stack of this game, one of the more obvious stacking options would be including Travis Kelce, who's one of the only tight ends that I'd really gravitate towards for Reignmakers purposes. Now let's go ahead and look at some of the projections and the prices for these players. So Austin Eckler does have the superstar status, only project for 15.91 fantasy points for us. I don't think he's a great superstar play when you consider all the great wide receivers that we have to look at right now. I wouldn't be looking at Austin Eckler in my superstar spot. But talking about Travis Kelce, got him projected for 18.26 fantasy points, pretty solid. In addition to that, he has a low asking price of $13.85. I do think that Travis Kelce is somebody to go out and target for a couple of reasons. Number one, this is a game that I think we want to be looking at from just an overall game environment perspective as one of the highest totals on the slate. Actually might have the highest total on the slate. I haven't looked at the most updated betting lines from today. But all that aside, Travis Kelce is somebody who I think is a little bit underpriced right now. He projects well. In addition to that, though, the Chiefs play on a lot of primetime games. And then you're going to have Travis Kelce, who's like nearly a must play in Chief showdown slates because of how much better he projects than most other non-superstar players. So Travis Kelce is somebody who not only has utility for this weekend, but also going forward as well. And then Keenan Allen, if I'm going to pay up for a wide receiver who doesn't have superstar status on the secondary market, I would rather go to Keenan Allen than Stephon Diggs. Two reasons why. Number one, we've got them projected very similarly. Number two, this is a game that's more stackable than the Bills game. Bills Patriots, like I like the Bills side of the game But like, what are we doing with the Patriots side of the game for correlation? We don't like anything from the Patriots side for Reignmakers purposes. So you can go Keenan Allen, Travis Kelce, get yourself some good correlation. In addition to that, Keenan Allen's less expensive than Stephon Diggs. If you guys remember, Stephon Diggs' core floor price was nearly $20, whereas Keenan Allen's $16.99. So you're saving a few dollars buying the Keenan Allen card as opposed to the Stephon Diggs card for a nearly identical projection between the two of them. All right, so if we're going to look at this game, I think Keenan Allen and Travis Kelce both make some sense. On the lower side, I thought Quentin Johnston was going to be somebody who was going to play a larger role for the Chargers once we saw Mike Williams get hurt, but it just hasn't been the case. He's not running very many routes. When he is on the field, he isn't really getting targeted, so it's hard to really consider him. It's been Palmer who's been the stronger option, but I kind of don't have a ton of interest in him for Reignmakers purposes because he's a guy who, like for DraftKings Classic contest the last few weeks, he was an affordable price tag. But we don't have to worry about salaries as far as what players cost outside of their secondary market price for Reignmakers. So it's hard for me to justify playing Joshua Palmer over like every other wide receiver that exists in the NFL. All right, the next game here. Here's one where you could find some value. I want to look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as a whole. And I'll turn the quarterbacks back on for this because Baker Mayfield might be a good value to go out and buy. All right, just select everybody now. Let's see. Am I going to be talked into Baker Mayfield here? Looks like I am. So Baker Mayfield is projected for 18.32 fantasy points with a low floor price here of $4.98. So that's a very affordable salary here, or I should say a very affordable price tag on Baker Mayfield. And you have good stack targets with him as well. Mike Evans, projected for 17.03 fantasy points. To get his cards for as cheap as $4.30. Then you've also got Chris Godwin, 15.38 fantasy point projection, $1.97. You could do a Baker Mayfield double stack here with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. It projects really well, and it is going to cost you about $10 for all three of them. I think that makes a whole lot of sense. You could also look at Rachaad White as a pretty good running back play. We were just before looking at the running back projections for this weekend and how thin the position is, especially outside of the superstars. Rachaad White, we're looking at James Cook just a little while ago here. Well, Rachaad White projects for about the same exact amount of fantasy points, but he's only going for $2 on the secondary mark. And he's got a great matchup this weekend against the Falcons, who is a team that has historically given up a lot of receptions to opposing running backs. And we have seen the Buccaneers like to get Rachaad White involved in the passing game, not like to a Kamara level where he gets 10, 11, 12 targets, but he's somebody who we could count on for 4, 5, 6 targets. He's going to be on the field for like 70+% of the Buccaneers snaps. He's going to get red zone touches. He's going to be in the game on the goal line. So Rachaad White is somebody I think kind of has sneaky upside. I know that he hasn't had the best games as of late, but we have seen some difficult matchups for the Buccaneers. If we look at the Buccaneers schedule, so I make sure that I've got all of the right matchups here that I'm reading off to you guys, and we can do it in order, which I think is going to help Rachaad White paint it in a little bit of a better light because the recent games here for Rachaad White, he's played against the Lions. The team only scored 6 points, played on the road against the Saints, against the Eagles. So these have been matchups that haven't been super conducive to him putting up big fantasy scores. This is the easiest matchup that we have seen Rachaad White in for the entire season. And I do think there's a lot of opportunity for him here to have a pretty big ceiling. And at only $2, I think he's worth going out and getting on the secondary market. Let's see if there's any other teams that really want to talk about here. Not in particular. So let's look at each position individually, and then we can look at Thursday Night Football tonight and see what stands out about building a lineup for this slate individually. And then also, if you guys haven't done it yet, I see some more people are trickling in. Do me a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and throw in any questions you have for me in the YouTube chat. All right, so let's go position by position. I'll turn off filters for the individual teams here. And let's go starting with QB. Here we go, QB. All right, so if we just look at the QBs, we have Lamar Jackson projected for the most fantasy points this weekend, but you would have to burn your superstar spot on him. The quarterback that we have projected the best, who's not a superstar, is actually Geno Smith. 18.67 fantasy points, Low floor price here of 649. So Geno Smith does look pretty interesting. I wasn't going to look at another team individually, but now let's bring up Seattle. All right, so if we go to Seattle, we've got Geno Smith, just talked about. He's projected the highest for us of any non-superstar quarterback. We've got Kenneth Walker, who's got a great projection at running back. And then DK Metcalf, fairly cheap, 425, 14.02 fantasy points. Decent but not great projection at wide receiver. But if you're looking for a very cheap stack, I do prefer Baker Mayfield to Mike Evans, but Geno Smith to DK Metcalf isn't a bad one. And then I do think Kenneth Walker stands out a lot here at running back. And when we go back over here and sort by all the running backs that we have to choose from this weekend, it's going to be Kenneth Walker who projects towards the top. Running backs. Yeah, so we had this filter up earlier. Kenneth Walker projects for about one more fantasy point than any other running back on the slate. And in addition to that, no superstar status. You're getting him with no superstars. You could still play another superstar with him. So some running backs to consider here. If you had your option of playing anybody, and nobody's like overly expensive right now. Kenneth Walker, $10. Josh Jacobs, $8.38. These are by far the two best running backs that we could play on the slate from a Reignmakers perspective. 8.65 and 17.62 fantasy points. You got Eckler here, but he has the superstar status. Then Bijan Robinson projects next best. But he's 3 fantasy points projected less than Josh Jacobs, 4 fantasy points less than Kenneth Walker. So Kenneth Walker, Josh Jacobs, I do think those are your best running back targets for the weekend. Wide receiver. Let's see what we're getting to from our projections here. So wide receiver, if you guys have the Stephon Diggs card in your collection, go and play him. If you're just looking to be optimal this week, Stephon Diggs makes a whole lot of sense. But pricey, $19.50. The best superstar play to me on this slate is going to be Cooper Kupp. No restrictions from him. He's looked fantastic so far. The emergence of Puka Nacua has not really had any significant impact on Cooper Kupp's target share. Cooper Kupp's re-emergence into the offense, coming back from injury, has impacted Nakua's target share a little bit. We saw a dip in targets for him last weekend. But Cooper Kupp projects for 20.53 fantasy points. That's our top projected superstar on the entire slate. And still right around $12, an affordable price. It's gone up over the last couple of weeks, but still not to some sort of exorbitant price. So I do like getting to Cooper Kupp. That's who I think we want to be using our superstar spot on most ideally. If we go and look at tight ends, which you don't really have to play tight end, mentioned that before, but if you're playing any of the deep slate contests, Travis Kelce's a no-brainer if you have a card of him. If not, $4 for a Mark Andrews. He projects for 13.16 fantasy points. And then we've got a low floor price here of $2.59 for Sam Laporta, projecting for 10.09 fantasy points. So those are the top guys to look at each position. Let's go and look at Thursday night football. Turn off the tight end filter. Let's go prime time. Although actually, just because there's the couple of primetime games, let's just sort by tonight's game, which is the Jacksonville Jaguars against the New Orleans Saints. So we just got these teams in here. One thing of note as of right now is that Trevor Lawrence is still officially listed as questionable on the injury report, but the reports over the course of the day have been very, we'll say, positive towards the status of Trevor Lawrence. I wouldn't 100% say for sure that Lawrence is playing tonight, but if you said, gun to my head, I have to guess whether Trevor Lawrence plays or not today, I would say yes, Trevor Lawrence ends up playing, and I'd put like a 95% confidence that Lawrence plays. If he doesn't, it probably something happens where he tweaks something when he's warming up in the game today, doesn't feel totally right. Outside of that, I think that Lawrence is going to be good to go today. But if you want to be risk adverse, maybe wait until you find out 100% that he's going to be in before you go out and you buy one of his cards or something like that. Because it's not like getting closer to game time. His low floor price, $6.99 right now. Like, it's not like he's going to be a $12 or a $15 player or anything like that prior to lock. But you are just giving yourself a little bit more protection in the event that the unforeseen happens, where if Lawrence isn't able to go, you don't want to be stuck that you just bought a bunch of his cards or something like that, and then you got this quarterback who isn't playing. So at the very least, I would wait until we get confirmation that Lawrence is in before you go out and you buy his cards. So Lawrence is somebody who, assuming he's in, you're going to want to roster today. Same goes for Derek Carr. These are the two quarterbacks in the game. They have the highest fantasy point projections, and neither of them are all that expensive. $6.99 for Lawrence, $5.50 for Carr. If I was going to fade one of the most highly projected players on the slate, it would be ETN for me. And this is because of salary. His low floor is $9.99. Compare that to Lawrence at $6.99 or Derek Carr at $5.50. So each of the quarterbacks not only project better than ETN in our projections, but in addition to that, they're cheaper than him by about half the price. In fact, you could buy a Derek Carr and a Trevor Lawrence card together for about the same price it's going to cost you to buy an ETN. So if you had to build a lineup right now where you're buying cards on the secondary market, ETN is definitely an optimal play from a fantasy perspective, but from a cost perspective, I prefer to look elsewhere. As far as the pass catchers, because then you get into a scenario where, all right, we're playing a Trevor Lawrence, we're playing a Derek Carr. Let's build a lineup under the assumption that we fade ETN. Who else lands in the lineup? I would say Chris Olave and Chris Kirk. Couple of reasons why. Number one, they project the two next best for us, which is always sensible. But the other side of this too is think about the correlation purposes. Derek Carr to Chris Olave, stack combination. Trevor Lawrence to Christian Kirk, stack combination. Now, a situation that always comes up when we're talking about the Jacksonville Jaguars passing game is Christian Kirk versus Calvin Ridley. I have preferred Christian Kirk over Ridley the entire season. Individually, Ridley's had a couple of better games. He's going to have better games going forward as well. But on the whole, I do think Kirk is going to have the better season than Calvin Ridley. Couple of reasons why. The main one being he's getting more targets than Ridley. And when you're getting a player who's getting more targets than the other, just by default, I consider him to be the number one wide receiver. There's also a little bit more familiarity with Christian Kirk, with Trevor Lawrence, with them having played in the past, and then also Calvin Ridley missing all of last year after he was suspended due to gambling on football games. One other thing as well here to note is that Christian Kirk, a little bit cheaper than Calvin Ridley. Not anything crazy, but throughout the season, we've generally seen Kirk cheaper than Ridley. And by the way, how much Ridley's stock has fallen? After the first week of the season, Ridley was the most expensive non-superstar player in Reignmakers. Calvin Ridley, I want to say his cards were like $22, and now they're all the way down to $4.10. Floor on Christian Kirk, like I said, not all that different, $4.05, but there are more cheap cards available for Kirk than Ridley. Ridley does still carry some more name value. He's generally who the field likes to go to over Christian Kirk. But for me, I'm more a Christian Kirk guy this year. So if I'm playing one of these pass catchers, I would prefer going to Christian Kirk. So that's what I would have as my favorite lineup for this slate. Lawrence, Carr, Olave, Christian Kirk, and then you just hope that ETN isn't the guy who goes out and breaks the slate. As far as my favorite my favorite captain options who we play in the multiplier for 1.5x fantasy points, I'd be, assuming he's good to go, I'd be a little bit more apt to go do Trevor Lawrence over Derek Carr. And then as far as the wide receivers, I'd be a little more apt to go to Chris Olave over Christian Kirk because I do view Olave as being a higher ceiling player this season. Let's see if there's any cheaper guys that we could look at to really be contrarian with. Michael Thomas, floor price of $220. Let's say Lawrence doesn't play today, right? Let's go through that scenario. We've only got like a minute left here before the show wraps up. If Lawrence doesn't play, then I do think you want to play ETN, and I would avoid the Jaguars passing game. Then you could go ahead and do something like Derek Carr, Chris Olave, Michael Thomas double stack with ETN, where I just assume the Jaguars will be running the ball more in the absence of Lawrence. Grandpa Steve bringing up Shaheed. Yeah, we've got Shaheed project for 7.94 fantasy points. I'm not going to say he isn't viable, but you only play a few guys in these Reignmakers showdown contests. And I don't think Shaheed is like super likely to outscore all the other pass catchers. We have Ingram, Thomas, Ridley, Kirk, and Olave all projected better than him. He's viable, but like a low priority. Anyway, guys, that is going to bring us to the end of the show. Thank you very much for watching. One more time, if you haven't done it yet, do me a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you want to check out these Reignmakers tools over at Stokastic.com, they're free, which is the best price out there. So if you could afford free, which I'm pretty sure you can, go check out these whenever you want to reference any sort of Reignmakers transaction making on the secondary market. So guys, thank you very much for watching. Enjoy the game tonight and good luck.